Happens when the world's most famous couple checks into luxury and finds hostility instead. This shocking tale of betrayal, courage, and justice will leave you questioning everything about power and respect. The air felt different in Scottsdale, Arizona that time of year, warm but with a hint of winter's cool breeze. Melania and Donald Trump had chosen this particular resort for its reputation as a tranquil oasis, far removed from the chaos of public life. The Camelback Vista Resort, a sprawling luxury property nestled against the rugged landscape, seemed the perfect retreat. From the moment they arrived, cameras discreetly clicked as curious onlookers caught glimpses of the couple stepping out of their sleek black SUV. The lobby sparkled with polished marble floors and golden chandeliers, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Melania noticed it first. The glances from some of the resort staff were not the usual mix of curiosity and admiration she was accustomed to. Instead, there was something sharper, almost pointed. She brushed it off, convincing herself it was nothing more than the weight of their fame. The check-in process was unusually slow, despite there being no line. The receptionist fumbled with the computer, her polite smile noticeably forced. "It'll just be a moment," she said, her tone clipped. Melania exchanged a glance with Donald, who shrugged. It was only the beginning. Their suite was immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the desert landscape. Yet the luxury couldn't mask the oddities that began to unfold. Room service was delayed by over an hour, and when it did arrive, the server barely made eye contact. The dinner order was incorrect, a mistake Melania couldn't recall happening in years. She tried calling the front desk to have it fixed, but the line rang and rang before eventually disconnecting. Donald, never one to keep his opinions to himself, was visibly irritated. "This is the kind of service they offer at one of the top resorts in the country?" he muttered, pacing the suite. Melania, always the diplomat, urged him to let it go. But deep down, even she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, things escalated. As the couple made their way to breakfast, a waiter muttered something under his breath as he passed. Melania couldn't catch the full sentence, but she distinctly heard the words, "foreign gold digger." Her face flushed, and she gripped Donald's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He hadn't, but her reaction was enough to confirm that the situation was spiraling. By the pool, the cold stares became impossible to ignore. A few guests whispered behind their sunglasses, while some staff outright ignored their requests for towels or drinks. It wasn't just negligence, it felt deliberate. Donald, visibly fuming, called over a manager demanding an explanation, but the response was dismissive. "We're short-staffed today. Apologies if your experience isn't up to par." But that wasn't the whole truth, and both Melania and Donald knew it. "This doesn't feel like a coincidence," Melania murmured as they walked back to their suite, her voice trembling slightly. But what could they do about it? The day wasn't over, and neither was the brewing storm. By midday, the tension had become impossible to ignore, not just for the Trumps, but for the other guests as well. The poolside whispers had turned into murmurs of disapproval as more people noticed the unusual behavior of the staff. A family seated near the bar overheard a server loudly complaining about entitled guests ruining the vibe of the resort. Though no names were mentioned, it wasn't hard to guess who they were talking about. Melania tried to maintain her composure, though every interaction seemed to chip away at her patience. A lunch order at the resort's main restaurant arrived cold, the server unapologetic. Donald's frustration boiled over when a passing employee laughed after hearing his complaint about the meal. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "I want to speak to the general manager, now." The manager, a middle-aged man with an air of practiced indifference, arrived minutes later. He listened to Donald's complaints with a neutral expression, occasionally nodding but offering little else. "I'll look into it," he finally said, his tone as detached as his demeanor. He didn't apologize, didn't offer a solution, just walked away. Melania leaned in, her voice low. "This isn't normal. They're not just being inattentive, they're being cruel." Donald, still fuming, nodded in agreement. But they weren't the type to back down. If the staff thought they could intimidate them into leaving, they had another thing coming. Later that afternoon, things took a more personal turn. Melania was browsing the gift shop while Donald took a phone call on the patio. She overheard two staff members talking near the counter. They didn't seem to notice her, or worse, they didn't care that she could hear them. "Can you believe she's married to him? Anything for money, I guess," one said. The other laughed, adding, "She probably doesn't even understand half of what he says." Melania's heart raced. She felt a mix of humiliation and anger, but she refused to let them see her upset. She placed the item she had picked up back on the shelf and walked out without saying a word. When she recounted the incident to Donald later, he was livid. "We're not going to let them treat us like this," he said firmly. "Not here. Not anywhere." But the real breaking point came that evening during dinner. The couple had reserved a private table on the terrace, hoping to enjoy a peaceful meal away from the prying eyes of the other guests. The view was stunning, the table set with crisp white linens and flickering candlelight. For a moment it felt like things might finally settle. Then the waiter arrived. He placed their dishes down with a little too much force, causing a glass of water to spill onto the tablecloth. "Oops," he said, smirking. Before they could respond, he added, "You know, not everyone's happy to see people like you here." Donald immediately stood, his voice commanding. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" The waiter shrugged, his smirk unwavering. "I think you heard me." The atmosphere shifted. Other diners turned to watch, their murmurs filling the air. Melania, feeling a wave of emotions, placed a calming hand on Donald's arm. But he wasn't about to let it go. "This is harassment," Donald said loudly, ensuring everyone around them could hear. "We came here for peace, not to be insulted by people who should be doing their jobs." The waiter's smirk faded, replaced by a look of defiance. "Maybe you should think about why people don't want you here," he said before walking away. The murmurs grew louder, and Melania felt all eyes on them. She wanted to shrink into her chair, but Donald's anger only fueled her resolve. "This isn't over," Donald muttered as he helped Melania to her feet. The evening had taken a turn they never anticipated, but the night wasn't done unraveling its surprises yet. The tension that had simmered all day boiled over that evening, spilling into the very core of the resort. By the time Melania and Donald left the terrace, the mood in the resort was electric with unease. Guests whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the escalating drama. Some agreed the Trumps deserved better treatment, while others muttered that the couple's presence had brought it on themselves. Back in their suite, Melania sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Her calm exterior belied the turmoil roiling inside her. "Why would they treat me like this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about you or me, Donald. It feels targeted." Her Eastern European accent, usually a point of admiration for those who knew her, seemed to be the very thing under attack. Donald was pacing, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. He had called their personal security team, instructing them to remain on high alert. "I don't care if they're subtle or overt," he told them. "We won't tolerate this." He ended the call, his expression a mix of anger and concern. "We should leave this place," he suggested. But even as he said it, he knew neither of them wanted to give the staff the satisfaction of driving them away. The turning point came just before midnight. A loud knock startled them from their thoughts. Donald opened the door to find the general manager, flanked by two uniformed security guards. The manager's expression was cold. "Mr. Trump, Mrs. Trump," he began, his tone sharp. "We've received complaints from our staff and some guests about your behavior." "Our behavior?" Donald shot back, incredulous. "Your staff has been harassing us all day. What are you talking about?" The manager raised a hand to silence him. "This is a peaceful establishment, and we don't tolerate disruptions. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to ask you to leave." Melania stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "You're blaming us for the actions of your staff? This is unacceptable." The manager didn't flinch. "We have our policies, Mrs. Trump. I suggest you review them." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, the security guards following close behind. The encounter was the final straw. Donald immediately contacted their legal team, detailing every insult, every slight, and every incident of neglect. Melania, meanwhile, composed herself and drafted a detailed account of the events in her journal. They had decided they would confront this head-on, but not before the world knew the truth. But just when they thought the night couldn't get worse, a new confrontation exploded. Around 2 a.m., the couple was jolted awake by the sound of shouting outside their door. Melania peeked through the peephole to find a small group of resort staff standing in the hallway. They weren't working. They were arguing, their raised voices echoing through the corridor. "I don't care who they are," one said angrily. "People like that don't belong here." Donald threw the door open, his sudden appearance silencing the group. "Is there a problem?" he demanded. The staff members froze, clearly caught off guard. One of them stammered an apology before they all hurried away, their whispers trailing off as they disappeared around the corner. Back in the suite, Donald and Melania were left with a chilling realization. This wasn't just poor service or petty insults. This felt like open hostility. "We're not going to let them sweep this under the rug," Donald said, his voice resolute. But the real shock was yet to come, one that would put everything into perspective. The following morning brought a sense of resolve. Melania and Donald weren't going to let the events of the previous day slide. As they made their way to the lobby, their presence once again drew stares, but this time it wasn't just from the staff. Guests began murmuring to one another, and a few even approached the couple. One woman, an older guest with a kind demeanor, leaned in and whispered, "I've noticed what's been happening. It's disgraceful." Melania thanked her softly, her eyes briefly meeting the woman's in silent gratitude. Donald, meanwhile, marched toward the front desk, his frustration bubbling over. "I need to speak to the owner of this resort," he demanded. "Not a manager, not a supervisor, the owner." The receptionist, clearly flustered, tried to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry, sir, but the owner isn't available at the moment. If there's something I can assist you with—" "You've done enough," Donald interrupted. His tone wasn't angry, it was commanding, cutting through any pretense of courtesy. "And trust me, this isn't over." Just as they turned to leave, a commotion erupted behind them. A guest had dropped their phone, and it clattered loudly against the marble floor. But the distraction provided a curious opportunity. Donald's gaze shifted to a staff member who had stepped out of a side office and was hurriedly whispering into a walkie-talkie. Something about the man's demeanor caught his attention. "We're not leaving until we figure out what's really going on," Donald muttered to Melania. She nodded, her resolve just as strong. "Let's head back to the room and regroup." Back in the suite, Donald scrolled through social media, trying to gauge whether any of the incidents had already made their way online. That's when he found it. A video clip posted just hours earlier. The footage was shaky, clearly taken by a guest on their phone, but it was unmistakable. It showed a resort staff member rolling their eyes as Donald asked for assistance, followed by a group of employees laughing and mimicking Melania's accent. The caption read, "When billionaires think they're above everyone else." Melania gasped as she watched. This is why," she said, her voice shaking. "They wanted to humiliate us." Donald's face darkened. "They're not just mocking us. They're trying to turn this into a spectacle." But the video's existence also presented an opportunity. It was proof, not just of the hostility they had faced, but of the deliberate malice behind it. Donald wasted no time forwarding the clip to his legal team, along with a detailed explanation of the events leading up to it. "They wanted attention? They're about to get it," he said, his tone ice cold. The day passed in a blur of phone calls and strategizing. Meanwhile, the resort buzzed with speculation. Guests were catching wind of the drama, and whispers about the staff's behavior spread like wildfire. Some sided with the Trumps, expressing outrage at the blatant disrespect, while others seemed to revel in the controversy. But the situation reached a new peak later that evening, when a member of the cleaning staff knocked on their suite door. The woman, visibly nervous, handed Melania a folded piece of paper. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But you need to know." Inside the paper was a list,